What do you actually produce during your 9 to 5? In 2025, more than 80% of jobs in developed countries are now in the service sector. But the reality is that many of these roles don't actually serve much purpose. Maybe you spend hours in Zoom calls, push out reports, or manage digital workflows. But if your position disappeared tomorrow, would anyone outside your department notice? We live in a time when capitalism doesn't just generate wealth, it manufactures busy work. The odd part is that the system depends on keeping these jobs around. But how did we get here? The answer lies in how the service sector has evolved. The 2025 service sector paradox. In 2025, the service sector dominates employment in wealthy countries, yet a significant share of these jobs exist mainly to justify themselves. Where service once meant providing direct value, nurses caring for patients, teachers instructing students, mechanics repairing vehicles, it now includes a swelling population of administrators, coordinators, and middle managers whose real impact is hard to pinpoint. Recent studies highlight how widespread this issue has become. A 2015 YouGov poll found that over a third of British workers felt their jobs made no meaningful contribution to the world. More recently, a 2023 study using data from the American Working Conditions Survey reported that nearly 1 in 5 U.S. workers considered their own roles socially useless. The feeling isn't limited to a single job type. Project managers, compliance specialists, and even department heads often admit their work could be automated or eliminated without any real consequence. This is the heart of the 2025 service sector paradox. The economy's fastest-growing segment is filled with roles that don't deliver clear value. While society benefits from essential service workers, doctors, firefighters, sanitation crews, many modern service positions are defined only by the absence of physical goods. A corporate diversity officer arranging monthly trainings is counted the same as a home health aide providing hands-on care, even though their daily impact is vastly different. The problem is often hidden by vague metrics and shifting job titles. In manufacturing, reducing staff translates directly into higher productivity per worker. In the service sector, however, adding new customer experience analysts or engagement coordinators is rarely questioned because their output is difficult to measure. Companies can expand administrative teams without clear evidence of any improvement beyond internal statistics. These jobs are also remarkably resilient. When organizations restructure, roles that seem redundant rarely disappear. Instead, they re-emerge under new names. A 2024 Deloitte report found that eliminated administrative positions often resurfaced within 2 years, relabeled as workflow architects or operational enablement partners. The job titles change, but the underlying tasks, or lack thereof, remain. Several factors keep this cycle going. First, there's the disconnect between labor and measurable results. It's easy to justify new hires when no one tracks what's actually being produced. Second, large teams signal importance and help justify budget increases, regardless of whether those teams are necessary. Most importantly, administrative roles generate their own workload, more paperwork, more procedures, more compliance requirements, fueling the need for even more staff. Healthcare offers a stark example. Since 2010, the number of U.S. healthcare administrators has grown far faster than the number of doctors. Hospitals now employ more people to process insurance paperwork than to provide medical care. Studies show that the majority of staff time in many hospitals is spent on documentation, not direct patient treatment. This administrative expansion isn't limited to healthcare. In large corporations, the ratio of managers to workers has shifted dramatically. Where there used to be one manager for every 6 employees, now there's often one for every 3, and many of these managers oversee other managers rather than frontline staff. Even in finance, regulatory compliance and legal departments have ballooned to rival or exceed the size of core business operations. The result is a service sector that increasingly serves itself. Each unnecessary job creates the need for more oversight, more coordination, and more justification, forming a self-reinforcing cycle of activity with little tangible output. Productivity is measured in meetings attended and reports generated, not in real-world results. Many workers recognize this reality. Surveys show that nearly half of white-collar employees struggle to explain the purpose of their jobs. A substantial minority admit that most of their daily tasks could be discontinued without anyone noticing. Some even report that they could be absent for weeks before their absence affected anything meaningful. This isn't a random outcome. It's the predictable result of an economic system that confuses activity with achievement and rewards the appearance of productivity over actual contribution. And as organizations search for ways to reduce bureaucracy, new layers often emerge in unexpected places. The bureaucratic Hydra. The bureaucratic Hydra is the phenomenon where every attempt to streamline work with technology ends up spawning new layers of oversight and administration. Rather than shrinking, bureaucracy adapts and multiplies, much like the mythical creature that grows two heads for every one cut off. The introduction of AI and automation was supposed to reduce paperwork and eliminate redundant roles, but the reality has played out very differently. Take the findings from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs Report 2025. While automation and AI are expected to displace 9 million jobs, they are also projected to create 11 million new ones, many of which are roles that exist purely to manage, regulate, and monitor the very technologies that were meant to simplify operations. These are not positions producing tangible goods or direct services. Instead, they generate compliance checklists, ethical reviews, and endless documentation. AI governance and oversight jobs, for example, are growing at a rate of 25% annually, with millions expected by the end of the decade. This paradox is visible in nearly every major industry. When banks automated loan approvals, the underwriting teams shrank, but new hires flooded in as algorithm accountability specialists and bias mitigation officers. The compliance department expanded, not shrank. Hospitals that adopted diagnostic AI soon found themselves employing more people to review and validate the AI's output than they once needed for the manual process. The same pattern repeats in insurance, where automated claims processing simply shifted claims adjusters into roles like claims automation liaisons, now responsible for reviewing and justifying the AI's decisions. The result: the average claim involves more human touchpoints than before automation. Cybersecurity has become a prime example of the Hydra effect. As AI systems multiply, so do the vulnerabilities, and the response is not just better technology, but more human oversight. The demand for AI threat analysts and model security engineers is rising rapidly, with projections of millions of jobs dedicated to monitoring and protecting AI systems. These roles are necessary only because the adoption of AI introduces new risks that require constant human attention. Much of this new work is circular. Surveys show that a significant portion of employees spend hours each week on productivity theater, tasks that exist to signal activity rather than create real value. Compliance officers file reports about compliance, managers hold meetings to plan other meetings, and documentation piles up to satisfy internal and external oversight. The insurance and finance sectors, in particular, have become factories for this kind of performative labor. Government regulation accelerates the process. Every new rule or compliance requirement spawns additional oversight positions. For example, the rollout of GDPR didn't just create data guardians. It led to guardian oversight coordinators, each layer monitoring the last. A recent EU study found that nearly half of regulatory jobs exist solely to supervise other regulators. In the corporate world, restructuring rarely eliminates bureaucracy. It simply renames it. Quality assurance specialists become process excellence consultants, and the cycle continues. Middle management is especially adept at surviving these changes. When automation threatens their roles, they rebrand as AI human integration managers or workflow optimization coordinators. The headcount grows, costs increase, and the actual output remains unchanged. Even technical sectors are not immune. Engineers now spend more time in review meetings and compliance documentation than actually building products. This bureaucratic Hydra persists because it serves multiple interests. Large teams justify bigger budgets and higher executive compensation. Complex processes create job security for those who understand them. Most importantly, the system is self-sustaining. Each new rule or oversight role generates more work, which then requires further oversight. As technology continues to reshape the workplace, the promise of efficiency is often replaced by an expanding web of accountability and performance. What was meant to simplify work ends up creating new forms of labor, often focused on monitoring, documenting, or justifying the work itself. This shift sets the stage for a new kind of workplace reality, where the appearance of productivity takes on a life of its own. Productivity theater. The reality of productivity theater has become a defining feature of office life in 2025. Instead of focusing on meaningful output, employees now spend a significant portion of their workweek on tasks that exist mainly to signal activity. This performative labor, sending late-night emails, scheduling unnecessary meetings, and maintaining a constant online presence, has become routine, especially as hybrid and remote work environments have taken hold. A recent Visier study shows just how widespread this behavior has become. 43% of U.S. workers now spend more than 10 hours each week on actions designed solely to appear busy. These actions include responding instantly to messages, timing email deliveries for maximum effect, and keeping screens active even when not working. The pressure is most pronounced among hybrid workers, who feel caught between two worlds, with 64% saying they prioritize being seen as valuable over actually delivering value. Surveillance software, intended to boost productivity, has only encouraged more elaborate workarounds. Employees now direct their energy toward outsmarting monitoring tools rather than producing results. Notification overload is another hallmark of productivity theater. According to Atlassian's research, 65% of knowledge workers say reacting to alerts and messages takes priority over completing substantive tasks. The average employee checks communication platforms dozens of times a day, constantly shifting focus and undermining the ability to do deep, uninterrupted work. Team members spend increasing amounts of time preparing status updates or documenting their intentions, often at the expense of making real progress. Meetings have become another stage for this performance. The number of video calls per employee has risen sharply, with many meetings serving no purpose beyond demonstrating engagement. A Microsoft analysis found that most participants could not even articulate the objective of the meetings they attended. Declining an invitation risks being seen as disengaged, so employees show up, multitask, and contribute little, all to maintain the appearance of involvement. Email habits reveal similar patterns. Since 2019, the volume of workplace emails has jumped, while average response times have plummeted. Much of this communication is performative. Messages are copied to extra recipients, filled with unnecessary updates, or written simply to create a record of activity. Employees admit to sending emails they know will go unread, just to leave a digital trail. Physical office routines have shifted online, but the intent remains the same. Where workers once arrived early or stayed late to be seen, remote employees now use digital tricks, mouse jigglers, scheduled messages, and delayed responses to simulate constant activity. Monitoring software companies report that a growing share of users rely on these tactics to appear engaged while actually stepping away from their work. Middle management is deeply entangled in this system. Managers often request frequent updates, organize redundant check-ins, and ask for confirmations on completed tasks, not to drive outcomes, but to justify their own oversight. Research from Harvard finds that a significant portion of a manager's time is spent creating work for others, amplifying the cycle of performative labor throughout the organization. The consequences are not just organizational, but psychological. Employees who spend more time on productivity theater report higher rates of burnout, anxiety, and job dissatisfaction. The drive to be visible rather than effective erodes genuine skill development and leads to a workplace where energy is spent maintaining appearances. Corporate culture reinforces these patterns. Advancement often depends more on being seen than on actual achievement. Studies tracking career progression show that those who focus on self-promotion advance faster than those who quietly deliver results. The very systems designed to measure productivity, calendar bookings, message response times, project trackers, have become targets for optimization, further decoupling perceived activity from real contribution. Some organizations have tried to counteract these trends. A handful have reduced recurring meetings or designated meeting-free days, freeing up time for focused work. Yet these are exceptions. For most, the cycle of documenting productivity, reporting on tasks, and signaling engagement continues, often requiring hours each week just to maintain the illusion of output. Productivity theater persists because it serves multiple needs. It offers managers plausible deniability, provides a sense of control, and gives employees a way to signal value in environments where tangible output is hard to measure. As a result, the act of working has become inseparable from the act of appearing to work, a dynamic that echoes organizational behaviors from another era. The Soviet parallel. A striking comparison emerges when you look at how modern corporations manage their workforce and how the Soviet Union once approached labor. David Graeber, in his analysis of BS jobs, points out that large companies today often mirror the Soviet practice of prioritizing headcount over genuine productivity. In the Soviet Union, managers were expected to employ as many people as possible, sometimes assigning them to redundant tasks like endlessly counting inventory, just to meet employment targets and maintain the appearance of importance. This wasn't about efficiency, it was about showing the system was working. Corporate environments today follow a similar script. Middle managers frequently create new roles, not because the business needs them, but to expand their own influence and justify larger teams. There are documented cases, like internal reports from major tech firms, where entire ghost projects exist solely to secure budget and keep people on payroll. These projects have schedules, deliverables, and teams, but they don't actually produce anything of substance. The motivation is less about results and more about maintaining or increasing managerial status. The Soviet concept of labor hoarding has found a new home in the digital age. Companies routinely keep a reserve of employees, sometimes labeled as bench strength or strategic readiness, who spend much of their time waiting for work that rarely appears. Internal memos from major firms reveal that up to 20% of staff are effectively held in reserve, a practice justified as being prepared for sudden business needs. In reality, it's often a way to avoid difficult conversations about downsizing and to maintain the illusion of organizational agility. Administrative bloat is another area where the parallel holds. Soviet bureaucrats were notorious for generating paperwork to justify their existence. Today, middle managers have taken this online. Employees spend a significant chunk of their time producing reports, slide decks, and analyses that are rarely used for actual decision-making. Surveys show that a large proportion of internal presentations are never viewed beyond the title slide, yet their production consumes thousands of hours. The act of creating documentation becomes more important than its content, echoing the Soviet habit of duplicating forms to prove activity. Promotion within these systems also follows familiar patterns. In the Soviet context, advancement often depended on political skill and the ability to grow one's department, not on improving efficiency. Modern corporations reward similar behavior. Studies show that managers who focus on expanding their teams and adding layers of hierarchy are promoted faster than those who increase productivity. The result is a pyramid of roles, where each layer's main function is to justify the existence of the one above it. Idle capacity isn't just tolerated, it's institutionalized. The Soviet model kept factories running below capacity to be ready for sudden increases in demand. Corporations now maintain talent benches of specialists who are paid to wait for projects that may never materialize. Staffing reports from major financial firms show a significant share of analysts classified as strategic reserves, echoing the old practice of running half shifts to keep workers on hand. Complexity breeds even more roles. Soviet defense plants famously employed intermediaries to navigate bureaucratic hurdles. In today's corporations, new job titles like process navigator or cross-functional liaison have emerged, existing mainly to help employees move through ever more complicated organizational structures. These positions don't create value. They exist because the system has become too convoluted to function without them. The psychological impact is similar as well. Soviet workers often reported high job security, but little sense of meaning in their work. Recent surveys of corporate employees show that many feel secure in their jobs, yet struggle to explain how their work contributes to broader goals. The sense of identity comes from being employed, not from the substance of the work itself. Despite the obvious inefficiencies, the system persists. Executives may privately complain about headcount inflation, but few are willing to shrink their own domains. The incentives all point toward maintaining or growing teams, not streamlining them. Like their Soviet predecessors, today's managers face little direct penalty for inefficiency, as long as the organization looks busy and well-staffed. This environment sets the stage for a new breed of roles, jobs that adapt to the latest corporate trends, yet add little real value. The evolution of these positions reflects how quickly the system can generate new forms of busywork, tailored to whatever the organization decides to prioritize next. The 5 new BS jobs in today's corporate environment. David Graeber's 5 categories of BS jobs have not disappeared. they've simply evolved. The latest variants are optimized for a digital, service-driven economy where the boundaries between meaningful work and empty performance are increasingly blurred. These roles are not about producing value, but about navigating and sustaining the machinery of modern organizations. The first is the metaverse liaison. As companies invest in virtual reality platforms, they create teams to manage VR meetings and digital workspaces. These liaisons spend their days troubleshooting technical issues, setting up virtual rooms, and assisting executives with basic digital tasks. Despite the technology's limited adoption, corporations maintain entire departments dedicated to this function, justifying ongoing investment in platforms that see little practical use. Internal audits from major tech firms show that most VR meetings could be replaced by a simple email, yet the infrastructure persists, propped up by the presence of these coordinators. Next are the DI bureaucrats. What began as a meaningful push for workplace equity has, in many organizations, devolved into a cycle of training sessions, surveys, and compliance reports. These professionals manage diversity metrics and organize regular workshops, but often lack the authority to enact substantive change. Reports and presentations are produced in large volumes, but their actual impact on hiring or workplace culture remains minimal. At some companies, the DI team now rivals or exceeds the size of operational departments, yet employee feedback consistently points to little improvement in day-to-day experiences. A third emerging role is the Zoom archivist. As remote and hybrid work have become the norm, companies now employ specialists to record, catalog, and store every virtual meeting. These archivists meticulously tag recordings, create searchable databases, and occasionally compile highlight reels. However, data from internal reviews indicates that only a tiny fraction of these archives are ever accessed again. The primary output is a growing collection of digital files that serve more as evidence of activity than as resources for future reference. Algorithm whisperers represent another layer. With the rise of AI-driven decision-making, organizations have introduced human intermediaries to interpret and communicate algorithmic outcomes. These employees don't build or improve the models. Instead, they translate algorithmic decisions into corporate language, draft explanations for rejected applications, or prepare summaries for compliance reviews. Their role is to provide a human face for automated systems, creating the appearance of oversight without influencing the underlying processes. Finally, the proliferation of ESVPs, executive senior vice presidents, illustrates how organizations inflate titles to signal growth and opportunity. These roles often come with vague responsibilities and minimal direct authority. Org charts now show layers of ESVPs between managers and actual executives, each with job descriptions that differ only in wording. Their main function is to justify the existence of additional management layers, preserving the illusion of upward mobility and organizational complexity. What unites these jobs is the difficulty their occupants face in describing their real purpose. Their outputs, reports, archives, explanatory memos, rarely shape decisions or drive outcomes. When companies restructure, these roles are rarely the first to go. Instead, they often persist or even multiply, as eliminating them would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about the organization's structure. The persistence of these positions is not accidental. Each new technology or initiative, whether it's virtual reality, AI, or diversity programs, creates a demand for roles that manage, monitor, or justify the change, rather than deliver its promised benefits. The result is a workplace where activity is mistaken for achievement, and the appearance of productivity takes precedence over actual contribution. As the service sector continues to expand and organizations become more complex, these roles reveal how entire categories of work can arise in response to the goon economy. The corporate landscape has developed a specialized category of roles that function less as creators of value and more as enforcers, defenders, or gatekeepers. This is what David Graeber described as the goon economy, an ecosystem of jobs whose purpose is to protect, advance, or extract advantage for their employer, often at the expense of genuine productivity. These positions are not just a byproduct of competition. They are a central feature of how large organizations operate today. Corporate legal departments are a clear example. In major tech companies, the number of corporate lawyers now often rivals or exceeds the number of engineers. These lawyers spend their days drafting preemptive lawsuits, filing for defensive patents, and preparing for litigation that may never come. The focus is not on supporting product development or innovation, but on creating legal fortifications. Patent activity, in particular, has shifted away from protecting genuine inventions to staking broad claims on ideas, just in case a competitor wanders too close. This arms race means that every company feels compelled to grow its legal team, not because it produces anything new, but because others are doing the same. Patent trolling has become a lucrative industry in its own right. Firms exist solely to acquire and weaponize patents, often for concepts they did not invent and never planned to use. Their business model is built on identifying vague or overlapping technologies, then leveraging legal threats to extract settlements from companies that are actually building products. The process diverts resources from innovation toward legal defense, and the only measurable output is paperwork and legal fees. The cycle continues because each side arms itself in response to the other, creating a negative-sum game where value is redistributed upward rather than created. This logic extends beyond law. The financial sector employs massive compliance teams, not to improve customer service or product quality, but to satisfy regulatory demands and insulate the company from risk. Compliance officers generate layers of documentation, risk assessments, and internal audits. When automation is introduced, such as algorithmic loan approvals, new roles emerge to audit the algorithms, document their fairness, and manage the resulting data. The work rarely results in better outcomes for customers. It exists to navigate the increasingly complex landscape of rules and liabilities. Consulting firms thrive in this environment. They are paid handsomely to diagnose problems, implement changes, and then manage the fallout from those very changes. One team might install a new software system that eliminates jobs, while another is brought in to handle the resulting disruption. The cycle is self-reinforcing, with each intervention creating the need for yet another layer of oversight or remediation. Lobbying and government relations departments are another hallmark of the goon economy. Corporations maintain large teams of lobbyists, not to improve their products, but to shape regulations in their favor or fend off unfavorable policies. These teams monitor legislative developments, draft position papers, and cultivate relationships with policymakers. Their output is measured in regulatory wins, not in any improvement to the underlying business or service. Other departments have adopted similar patterns. Human resources teams, once focused on hiring and support, now devote significant resources to managing internal policies, drafting mission statements, and conducting compliance training. The result is a proliferation of roles that exist primarily to demonstrate that the company is managing its risks and responsibilities, rather than to improve the employee experience or workplace culture. The defense industry has long operated on these principles. Contractors employ vast numbers of specialists whose main job is to navigate procurement rules, prepare bids, and generate compliance documentation. The actual engineering work is often dwarfed by the effort required to satisfy bureaucratic requirements. These patterns are not isolated. They reflect a broader shift toward roles that exist to defend territory, manage complexity, or extract rents from other productive work. The more intricate and adversarial the system becomes, the more resources are devoted to these functions. The result is an economy where the best compensated and most secure roles are often those least connected to actual goods or services. As this dynamic becomes more entrenched, it shapes not just the external relationships between companies, but also the internal structure of organizations. The proliferation of roles dedicated to oversight, compliance, and risk management creates fertile ground for new layers of management and coordination. The managerial class. The rise of the managerial class is one of the defining features of today's corporate structure. Middle management has grown into a distinct layer, often operating independently from the frontline work it supposedly coordinates. In many large organizations, the ratio of managers to actual contributors has shifted dramatically. At companies like Meta, what used to be a single manager overseeing a broad team has become a structure where each manager is responsible for just a handful of employees. Their primary function is less about driving results and more about justifying their own existence through routine supervision, endless alignment meetings, and the constant production of status reports. This pattern isn't accidental. A 2023 study of corporate hierarchies found that as new management layers are added, the administrative burden for each team member rises sharply. Engineers and specialists now spend significant portions of their work weeks documenting progress, updating trackers, and preparing for check-ins. Tasks designed to feed the management apparatus rather than to advance actual projects. Attempts to streamline these layers often backfire, as eliminated positions quickly reappear under new titles like process coordinator or workflow lead. The system adapts to preserve itself, ensuring that the managerial class remains entrenched. The psychological impact of this environment is substantial. Surveys consistently show that many managers struggle to articulate the value of their work beyond keeping things organized. A recent Gallup poll found that more than half of mid-level managers could not identify how their daily activities contributed to broader company goals. This sense of futility is linked to higher rates of anxiety and imposter syndrome among managers, who often feel trapped in cycles of moving information between systems without influencing outcomes. Corporate incentives reinforce this dynamic. Promotion is frequently tied to the size of a manager's team rather than the efficiency or output of that team. Research from Harvard indicates that managers who grow their headcount are promoted more quickly than those who optimize processes or improve performance with existing staff. As a result, managers are motivated to hire more subordinates, regardless of actual workload, creating organizational pyramids where status is measured by the number of direct reports rather than by results. Meetings have become a central part of the managerial routine. Middle managers now spend the majority of their workweeks in meetings, many of which serve little purpose beyond coordinating future meetings or refining processes for reporting. Internal metrics at several large firms reveal that a significant share of these meetings focus on planning, reviewing, or justifying the existence of other meetings. This cycle of coordination rarely produces new value, but does provide a steady stream of activity that can be documented and reported up the chain. Budgeting practices further entrench the managerial class. Departmental funding is often linked directly to headcount, incentivizing managers to inflate team sizes ahead of budget reviews. When questioned about the necessity of these roles, justifications are typically couched in vague terms like strategic alignment or future readiness, masking the lack of concrete deliverables. This approach ensures that middle management roles are protected, even in the face of broader efficiency drives. Credentialing requirements have also become part of the managerial ecosystem. Many mid-level positions now demand certifications or specialized training that have little bearing on actual job performance. Maintaining these credentials consumes time and resources, but serves mainly to reinforce existing hierarchies and limit access to management roles. Performance metrics for managers often emphasize process over outcome. Evaluations focus on the number of check-ins, career development conversations, or updated plans, rather than on measurable improvements in team productivity or business results. This disconnect encourages box-ticking behaviors and makes it difficult to distinguish between effective leadership and mere activity. The managerial class functions much like the taskmasters described by David Graeber, roles that create, assign, and monitor work that would largely proceed without their intervention. Experiments in removing management layers have sometimes led to measurable gains in productivity, but these efforts are rarely expanded, as organizations remain concerned about career paths and the disruption of established hierarchies. This structure closely resembles a kind of corporate feudalism, where the authority and status of managers are tied to the number of people they oversee rather than to the value they create. Downsizing efforts often stall before reaching these layers, as each manager's position is protected by the logic that more oversight is always necessary. Despite mounting evidence of inefficiency, the managerial class continues to expand because organizational systems reward its growth. Until companies shift their focus from headcount and process metrics to actual output, the layers of management will persist. This environment leaves workers and managers alike navigating a maze of coordination and oversight, setting the stage for how these patterns play out in the evolving world of remote work. The remote work mirage. Remote work was widely expected to cut out the inefficiencies of office life, but in practice, it has simply shifted them online. The promise of flexibility and focus has given way to a new form of digital busywork, virtual presenteeism. Employees now join more meetings than ever, with internal surveys indicating that the average knowledge worker attends nearly twice as many meetings as before the pandemic. Most of these calls serve little purpose beyond maintaining a sense of visibility. Instead of reducing distractions, remote work has made it easier for employees to signal their presence without contributing meaningful work. The mechanics of this system are straightforward but pervasive. Workers keep their cameras on through entire meetings, even when they have nothing to add, just to be seen. Messages are sent late at night or early in the morning to suggest dedication. Some employees use mouse jigglers and keyboard simulators to keep monitoring software active, creating the illusion of constant engagement. Studies show that nearly a third of remote workers now rely on these tactics to manipulate productivity trackers, focusing on the appearance of effort rather than actual results. Meeting culture has adapted to the remote environment by multiplying. Where employees once had a handful of weekly meetings, they now face calendars packed with short, frequent check-ins. Managers, anxious about losing oversight, schedule extra alignment sessions. Employees, worried about being overlooked or replaced, accept every invitation rather than risk appearing disengaged. The cycle is self-reinforcing. More meetings drive more status updates, which then justify even more meetings. The bulk of this activity is performative, designed to reassure both workers and their supervisors that everyone is still busy. This shift is reflected in communication patterns as well. The volume of emails and instant messages has soared, but the substance of these exchanges has thinned. Many messages are little more than digital signals, just checking in, circling back, or per my last email, that add little value. The pressure to respond quickly and remain visible online has led to a culture of constant notification checking, undermining the ability to focus on meaningful work. Employees now spend a significant portion of their week crafting messages and attending meetings that exist only to prove they are working. Managers play a central role in sustaining this environment. In the absence of direct oversight, they request frequent updates and organize recurring check-ins. Research shows that a substantial share of a manager's time is now spent creating work for others, demanding reports, reconfirming decisions, and tracking the status of tasks that have already been completed. This creates an illusion of oversight and productivity, but rarely leads to better outcomes. The psychological impact of virtual presenteeism is significant. Employees who devote themselves to productivity theater report higher rates of burnout and stress. The gap between visible activity and real accomplishment fosters anxiety and a sense of futility. Ironically, those who appear the most active in digital systems are often the least productive, as their energy is spent on maintaining appearances rather than advancing projects or developing skills. Corporate culture amplifies these tendencies. Advancement and recognition increasingly hinge on visibility rather than achievement. Employees who master the art of self-promotion, quick responses, constant availability, and visible participation move up faster than those who quietly deliver results. The systems designed to track productivity, calendar bookings, response times, and participation metrics become targets for optimization, further decoupling activity from value. Some organizations have tried to break this cycle. A few have cut back on recurring meetings or implemented meeting-free days, freeing up time for focused work. Others have experimented with clearer goal setting and more transparent communication. Yet these efforts are exceptions. For most, the dominant culture still rewards those who fill their calendars and inboxes, regardless of what actually gets done. The tools themselves reinforce the cycle. Calendar apps and communication platforms highlight who is busy, who is available, and who is responding quickly. Project management systems reward those who document every step, even when the documentation adds little to the outcome. Employees end up spending hours each week maintaining these digital records, feeding a loop where the act of tracking work becomes work in itself. The move to remote work was meant to eliminate unnecessary barriers and let employees focus on what matters. Instead, it has created a digital environment where the performance of productivity takes precedence over actual results. This shift has not only changed how work is done, but also how value is recognized and rewarded. In this landscape, the pressure to appear busy has become its own barrier, one that shapes who advances, who is seen as valuable, and what skills are considered essential for survival in the modern workplace. The Credential Trap. One of the most persistent features of the modern workplace is the spread of credential requirements that have little to do with actual job performance. This is the Credential Trap, a system where the accumulation of certificates and digital badges has become a prerequisite for even the most basic corporate roles. HR departments now demand credentials like Agile Scrum Emotional Intelligence Facilitator or Digital Transformation Leadership Coach for positions that previously required only basic competence and a track record of results. These certifications rarely make anyone better at their job. Their real function is to create barriers to entry and preserve the status of those already inside the system. The business of certification has grown rapidly. Training companies churn out new credentials every year, each more specific than the last. Project managers, for example, spend thousands of dollars annually just to keep their certifications up to date, despite studies showing no link between these credentials and project success. Most certifications expire every couple of years, forcing workers to pay for regular recertification courses. This cycle sustains a booming industry for training providers, while offering limited benefit to the workers themselves. In a recent LinkedIn survey, more than 2/3 of certified professionals admitted that their credentials had never been relevant to their daily work. Credential requirements now function much like the guild restrictions of the past. Instead of apprenticeships and journeyman tests, today's workers face a maze of digital certificates that must be collected to qualify for promotions or even to keep their current jobs. Internal documents from large firms show that candidates without specific certifications are routinely filtered out by automated systems, regardless of their actual experience or performance. This rewards those who accumulate credentials over those who demonstrate results. It's not uncommon for a skilled employee to be passed over for advancement simply because they lack a trendy certificate that can be obtained in a weekend webinar. The proliferation of these requirements is driven by HR technology. Applicant tracking systems now filter resumes by keyword, rejecting anyone who doesn't list the right combination of credentials. Job postings for entry-level positions demand titles like Certified Brand Storytelling Strategist or AI-Assisted Business Intelligence Prophet, even when the actual work involves little more than basic data entry or routine marketing tasks. The result is a hiring process that values the appearance of expertise over the substance of it. Training companies actively shape this environment. When a new certification is introduced, it's often accompanied by a marketing push to have it added to job descriptions. Within months, the credential becomes standard, not because it adds value, but because it gives HR departments another filter for narrowing down applicants. Certification frameworks are updated frequently, with older versions quickly rendered obsolete, ensuring a steady stream of workers paying for retraining just to stay in place. The focus on credentials has a clear psychological impact. Workers spend a significant share of their time preparing for exams and renewing certificates rather than developing practical skills. Recertification periods are now a major source of stress, with many professionals describing them as more anxiety-inducing than performance reviews. Careers become a checklist of required badges, shifting attention away from solving problems or building expertise. Learning and development budgets reflect these priorities. At many large companies, the majority of training funds go towards certification programs rather than substantive skill building. Employees are sent to courses that teach test-taking strategies, not actual knowledge. The most popular modules focus on passing exams, rather than teaching concepts that could improve performance. Some industries take credential inflation to extremes. In banking, staff are required to hold Blockchain Business Value Architect certificates for roles that rarely interact with blockchain technology. Compliance officers must earn AI Ethics Compliance badges for systems that haven't changed in years. These requirements do not reflect business needs. They serve as convenient screening, tools and liability shields for HR departments. This system creates real barriers for career changers and older workers. The cost of obtaining the necessary credentials to move into a new field can reach tens of thousands of dollars, protecting incumbents and making it harder for outsiders to compete. Age discrimination lawsuits increasingly cite credential demands as covert exclusion tactics, with some courts beginning to recognize these barriers as unreasonable. Ironically, the roles that require the most real-world skill, like surgeons or pilots, are still licensed through demonstrated competency, not endless credential renewals. It's the jobs with the least tangible output that demand the longest list of certificates. The less measurable the work, the more paperwork is required to prove you can do it. Universities and training firms have adapted by offering endless micro-credentials, each covering a narrow slice of knowledge and requiring separate assessments and fees. This fragments learning and encourages a focus on collecting documentation rather than building expertise. Ultimately, the credential trap does more to serve organizational risk aversion than to develop employee skills. HR departments use certificates as proof of due diligence, while training providers profit from perpetual retraining. For workers, the outcome is a cycle of paying for the privilege to work, with little to show for it beyond the next renewal reminder. As organizations grow more reliant on these mechanisms, they set the stage for a workplace where every new requirement spawns another, each one justified by the need to regulate, monitor, or prove compliance with the last. The Kafka pipeline. Beneath the surface of modern organizations, a new pattern has emerged, one where layers of process, oversight, and regulation feed on each other in an endless cycle. This is the Kafka pipeline, a system where bureaucracy doesn't just grow in response to complexity. It manufactures its own necessity, expanding for its own sake. Every regulatory change sets off a chain reaction. Take the GDPR. What started as a straightforward data privacy law has become an industry unto itself. Companies first hired data protection officers, then assembled teams to audit those officers, followed by consultants to train the auditors, and finally invested in software to monitor the consultants. A recent EU study found that nearly half of regulatory positions now exist only to oversee other regulators, creating a recursive loop of compliance that rarely improves outcomes for anyone outside the system. Financial services illustrate this recursive logic. In response to anti-money laundering rules, banks didn't just employ more compliance staff. They built entire departments for compliance optimization and regulatory alignment. At some of the world's largest banks, more people now document compliance than actually move money. The cost of proving adherence to regulations often exceeds the cost of implementing the rules themselves. Internal memos at major institutions describe spending tens of millions annually just to verify that the previous year's compliance spending was justified. Healthcare is another example. Legislation intended to help patients navigate insurance has produced layers of navigators, coordinators, and analysts. Hospitals routinely employ more staff to process insurance paperwork than to provide direct care. Since 2010, administrative roles in healthcare have grown exponentially, far outpacing the increase in medical professionals. The result is a system where each new requirement generates a new job, which in turn requires more oversight, creating a dense web of roles that sustain themselves. Legal departments operate in a similar fashion. Each new lawsuit prompts the hiring of additional attorneys, paralegals, and e-discovery specialists, whose main function is to manage the ever-growing volume of legal process. Rather than reducing risk, these roles institutionalize it, with legal teams growing in proportion to the complexity of the disputes they're meant to resolve. The defense industry offers a parallel. Procurement rules designed to prevent waste have become so intricate that companies now employ large teams just to interpret them. In some cases, more people are tasked with managing paperwork than with designing the actual products. Documents detailing reporting requirements can run to hundreds of pages, eclipsing the technical specifications themselves. Cybersecurity departments exemplify this recursive expansion. Each new monitoring tool creates the need for staff to interpret its alerts, which then generates additional alerts about the monitoring process, requiring even more oversight. Major firms now employ analysts whose sole job is to assess why employees ignore the majority of security warnings, adding yet another layer to the original problem. The same cycle appears in education administration, where universities employ more administrators than faculty. Each new policy requires additional staff to enforce it, with the process repeating as new compliance layers are added. In some cases, entire offices exist to create and monitor policies that require further oversight. AI ethics and algorithmic accountability teams have become fixtures in the tech sector. Every system launched is followed by boards and auditors tasked with reviewing its fairness and potential bias. These groups focus on producing reports and recommendations, but rarely drive substantive change, resulting in a growing archive of documentation that justifies the next round of oversight. Risk management and auditing follow the same script. Firms hire assessors to identify risks, then add oversight to monitor those assessors and software to track the process. The cycle continues as new risks are identified, prompting the creation of further roles to address them. The actual prevention of crises becomes secondary to the maintenance of the risk management apparatus. Across sectors, the Kafka pipeline is powered by the logic that every new process or rule demands its own infrastructure. Complexity is not a side effect, it's the product. The most stable jobs are those that exist to manage the paperwork generated by other paperwork managers. Each new layer is justified by the need to oversee the last, and each new requirement becomes the seed for another position. This system ultimately operates according to its own internal logic, often disconnected from the original goals it was meant to serve. The focus shifts from outcomes to process, from improvement to maintenance. What remains is a structure that measures its own activity, setting the stage for the productivity illusion. The modern workplace is gripped by what can only be called the productivity illusion. It's a system where what gets measured is rarely what matters, and the metrics themselves have become the focus. At firms like Goldman Sachs, analysts routinely clock 100-hour weeks, but internal reviews show that the majority of these hours are spent on tasks with no bearing on the firm's actual goals. Endless formatting, preparing slides that no one reads, and updating trackers for the sake of documentation. The more trivial the task, the more likely it is to be tracked, reviewed, and celebrated in performance reports. This pattern isn't confined to finance. Tech giants have turned activity monitoring into a science, with software tracking every keystroke, mouse movement, and meeting attendance. Employees, in turn, have learned to play the game, keeping their webcams on during meetings while multitasking, scheduling emails to send late at night, and finding ways to appear online at all hours. One Amazon employee described spending more time filling out productivity logs than actually working. The illusion is maintained because the systems reward activity signals, not outcomes. Consulting firms have built their business models around this illusion. Deliverables are measured in the thickness of slide decks and the volume of documentation, not in the impact of recommendations. Internal memos reveal that junior consultants spend nearly half their time on formatting and template alignment. A 200-page report is seen as more valuable than a concise 20-page analysis, regardless of what either document achieves. The end product is a mountain of paperwork that justifies the hours billed, rather than any real change for the client. This ritualized approach to productivity extends across industries. In corporate offices, employees attend meeting after meeting, often with the sole outcome of scheduling yet another meeting. Status reports are generated about other status reports, and working groups form to document their own activities. A Salesforce audit found that most internal documents are never accessed after creation, yet their production consumes a third of total work hours. The cycle persists because every step is measured and rewarded, even if the work itself is redundant. Healthcare demonstrates the risks of this illusion. Nurses now spend more time documenting care than delivering it. Electronic health record systems track every click, and compliance is measured by documentation speed, not by patient outcomes. A nurse can be reprimanded for failing to record a minor task within minutes, even if that time was spent saving a patient's life. The system values the record over the result. Academia has also succumbed. Professors are judged by the number of publications, not by the substance of their teaching or research. Studies show that a significant share of academic papers go uncited and unread, yet publication counts continue to rise because they are the metric that matters for advancement. The actual impact on students or on knowledge is secondary. Manufacturing, once a model of output-driven work, has adopted similar practices. Productivity is sometimes measured by machine utilization rather than product quality. Workers are pressured to keep equipment running, even if it means producing defective goods that will be discarded later. The highest productivity scores often coincide with the most product recalls. Legal and creative industries are not immune. Law firms judge associates by billable hours, not legal outcomes. Advertising agencies reward campaign volume and pitch activity over sales impact. The startup world measures success by fundraising and hustle metrics, not sustainable revenue or business models. Government agencies track process speed, not effectiveness. Clerks are rated on how quickly they process forms, not on accuracy or service quality. Most federal performance metrics focus on activity, not results. This productivity illusion persists because it serves the needs of those who design and oversee these systems. Managers get data to justify their positions, HR departments get clear metrics for evaluation, and executives have dashboards to present to boards and investors. Workers learn to optimize for what's measured, even when it has little relationship to actual value. The result is a workplace where the appearance of efficiency replaces genuine progress. Employees become experts at performing work for the sake of measurement, not for the sake of outcomes. The true cost of this illusion is not just wasted time, but the resources, energy, and well-being sacrificed in the process, a reality that becomes clear when you start to look at the numbers behind meaningless work. The cost of BS. The economic and human costs of pointless work are difficult to ignore. Bain & Company's 2025 estimate puts the annual cost of wages for jobs that could vanish without affecting productivity at $3.7 trillion. These are salaries paid for producing unread reports, attending meetings that yield no decisions, and maintaining bureaucratic systems that exist only to justify themselves. Financially, the waste is immense, but the deeper toll is personal and psychological. A growing body of research shows that the damage goes well beyond lost money. Workers assigned to roles they perceive as socially useless face much higher rates of anxiety and depression. A recent study in Work, Employment and Society found that 19% of workers believe their jobs serve no real purpose, with the highest rates among the kinds of administrative and managerial roles often described as BS jobs. The data shows a direct link. Those who see their work as pointless are more likely to report poor mental health, including symptoms of depression and chronic stress. Gallup's 2023 Global Workplace Survey paints a stark picture of the modern office. 6 out of 10 employees say they feel psychologically disengaged at work. They don't know what their tasks contribute, why their roles matter, or how they connect to the wider mission of their organization. This sense of disconnection is not just a matter of job dissatisfaction. It signals a breakdown in the relationship between labor and meaning. When people cannot see the value in what they do, the result is a pervasive sense of alienation. The healthcare sector illustrates this cost in stark terms. Hospitals now employ more administrative staff than they have beds, and compliance officers outnumber surgeons in some departments. Each new rule or reporting requirement adds layers of paperwork that shift attention away from patient care. Nurses spend more time documenting their actions than caring for patients. Burnout rates among healthcare workers have soared in recent years, and the administrative burden is a major factor. Corporate offices show similar patterns. Junior consultants at large firms report that nearly half their time is spent on tasks like formatting slides or updating trackers, not on analysis or client work. Many describe a sense of emptiness, not because the workload is high, but because the work itself is disconnected from any real outcome. The toll is visible in rising rates of anxiety and burnout, as workers struggle to find meaning in what they do. The pressure to maintain credentials adds another layer. Workers spend thousands each year on certifications that studies show do little to improve performance. The process of constant retraining and recertification creates stress without delivering new skills or a sense of accomplishment. Many professionals describe the credential cycle as more stressful than their actual job responsibilities. Middle management is especially vulnerable to these pressures. Managers in roles that exist mainly to perpetuate bureaucracy report some of the highest levels of occupational stress. The need to constantly justify one's position and invent tasks that appear valuable leads to a unique kind of psychological strain. Some managers admit to experiencing panic attacks before performance reviews, knowing that their team's output is unlikely to withstand scrutiny if measured by real impact. The legal, financial, and educational sectors provide further examples. Lawyers draft contracts that require other lawyers to interpret. Bankers spend long hours producing analyses that executives skim or ignore. University administrators outnumber faculty, creating policies that generate more administrative work. In each case, skilled professionals feel their expertise is wasted on self-sustaining cycles of paperwork and compliance. Despite clear evidence of harm, these patterns persist. Organizations continue to fund roles that add little value, often out of fear of admitting inefficiency or disrupting established systems. Workers, aware of the emptiness of their roles, hesitate to speak up, worried that doing so would make them expendable. The cost is measured not only in wasted resources, but in widespread disengagement and declining well-being. These dynamics reveal a deeper problem, one that is not simply about individual jobs or isolated industries, but about how the system as a whole is structured to reward the appearance of activity over meaningful results. Why capitalism can't self-correct. If you look at the mechanisms that govern today's workplaces, it becomes clear that inefficiency isn't just a bug in the system, it's often a feature. The question isn't why capitalism hasn't weeded out pointless jobs, but why it keeps creating and protecting them. The answer lies in the way incentives are structured inside modern organizations. The system rewards what's visible and measurable, not what's meaningful or effective. Competition is supposed to force companies to operate efficiently, yet the reality is that organizations have developed ways to shield themselves from the discipline of the market. Employees who are adept at signaling busyness or managing their own visibility tend to advance more quickly than those who simply deliver results. In a Harvard study that tracked thousands of employees, those who focused on gaming performance metrics and self-promotion received promotions at a significantly higher rate than their peers who quietly achieved better outcomes. The system doesn't fail to correct inefficiency. It rewards those who can best navigate its signals. Middle management provides a clear example. Advancement is tied to the size of a manager's team, not the value that team produces. Internal corporate reports consistently show that managers who grow their headcount are promoted faster than those who streamline or improve efficiency. This leads to organizational pyramids where each new layer exists largely to justify the one above it. The result is more oversight, more reporting, and more meetings, none of which necessarily lead to better performance. Technology has only intensified these trends. Digital productivity tools track every click, meeting, and message, but rarely measure substantive output. Employees respond by optimizing for these metrics. Keeping cameras on during meetings, sending emails at odd hours, and staying active on internal chat platforms. The effort shifts from doing valuable work to appearing engaged. One Amazon employee described spending hours each week updating productivity trackers that had no impact on her actual job performance. These systems create an illusion of accountability while missing the substance of what needs to be done. Promotion and compensation systems reinforce the focus on visibility. Studies from Yale and other institutions show that employees who prioritize self-promotion and visibility move up the ladder faster than those who focus on results. In consulting and finance, associates are rewarded for billable hours and the volume of deliverables, not for their impact. In many cases, the thickness of a report or the number of meetings attended is treated as a proxy for thoroughness, even when the content adds little value. This misalignment isn't limited to the private sector. In healthcare, compliance and documentation are tracked more closely than patient outcomes. Nurses and doctors spend increasing amounts of time on paperwork to satisfy reporting requirements, often at the expense of direct care. In academia, the number of publications counts for more than teaching quality or research impact, pushing scholars to prioritize quantity over substance. In government contracting, the complexity of procurement rules generates more jobs for compliance specialists than for the people actually building or delivering services. Legal departments have grown in size and influence, not because they resolve more disputes, but because they are rewarded for institutionalizing risk management and preemptive legal action. HR departments expand their reach by implementing new tracking systems and compliance initiatives, which often create more administrative work than they eliminate. The cycle perpetuates itself as each new process or requirement justifies another layer of oversight. Credentialism plays its own part. Universities and training companies produce certified professionals for roles that exist mainly to oversee or credential others. Credentials become barriers to entry, protecting existing roles and justifying the expansion of administrative layers. Surveys consistently reveal that most professionals find little relevance between their credentials and their daily work, yet the system continues to demand them. The core problem is that the market optimizes for what can be measured and reported, not for what actually matters. Managers are incentivized to grow teams rather than improve them. Employees learn to gain performance metrics rather than focus on meaningful outcomes. Corporations expand by adding complexity, not by stripping it away. The illusion of productivity becomes the standard by which success is judged and rewarded. This is not a system that will correct itself. The incentives are too deeply embedded, and the behaviors they produce are too closely tied to career advancement and organizational survival. The result is a workplace environment where efficiency and value creation are often secondary to maintaining the appearance of being busy. But what's perhaps most striking is how employees themselves have adapted to these realities, not just tolerating the system, but in many cases defending it. The Stockholm Syndrome. The phenomenon known as Stockholm Syndrome is not limited to hostage situations. It's alive and well in the modern workplace. Employees form strong psychological attachments to the very routines and tasks that make their jobs feel secure, even when those tasks have little inherent value. When companies attempt to streamline operations or cut redundant meetings, it's often employees who push back the hardest. Their resistance is not about the loss of meaningful work, but about the disruption of the structures that fill their days and shape their identities. This attachment is evident in the way workers build their sense of self around their roles. Middle managers define their worth by the size of their teams, not by what those teams achieve. HR professionals measure their impact by the sheer number of training sessions delivered, regardless of whether those sessions change behavior. Even in the face of automation or efficiency drives, employees express anxiety at the thought of losing routine tasks that have become woven into their daily existence. The work may be pointless, but it provides a sense of order and purpose. Stockholm Syndrome in the workplace manifests as a kind of loyalty to the systems and rituals that keep people busy. Consultants spend long hours building slide decks that clients barely skim, yet take pride in their endurance. Corporate lawyers track billable hours as a badge of honor, even when the outcomes of their work are inconsequential. Administrative staff can list in detail why their paperwork is vital, despite evidence that much of it is never reviewed. The more detached the work is from real outcomes, the more fiercely employees defend its necessity. The pressure to participate in productivity theater is driven by more than habit. It's a survival strategy. In environments where job security feels uncertain, visible busyness becomes a shield. Employees send more emails, shrink their response times, and fill their calendars with meetings, not because it leads to results, but because it signals value to managers and peers. The illusion of constant activity offers comfort in a workplace where expectations are ambiguous and the criteria for advancement are unclear. Organizational incentives reinforce these behaviors. Promotion often goes to those who master the art of visibility rather than those who quietly deliver results. Employees quickly learn that appearing indispensable is more valuable than being genuinely effective. Managers, wary of empty calendars, keep their teams locked in cycles of meetings and updates, worried that idle time signals redundancy. These patterns are deeply embedded in fields like education and healthcare. Professors chase publication quotas, even when they know most papers will go unread, because the system rewards quantity over substance. When institutions propose reducing these requirements, faculty often resist, having built entire careers on the existing metrics. Nurses and doctors spend more time documenting care than providing it, yet defend the rituals of paperwork, seeing them as essential to their professional identity. Attempts to simplify these processes are often met with skepticism or outright opposition. In technology and finance, the same dynamics play out. Engineers repeatedly refactor code to show activity on dashboards, and bankers work long hours on analyses that senior executives barely glance at. The fear of being seen as unnecessary leads employees to rationalize and defend the very tasks that keep them busy, even when they recognize the futility. The rituals of corporate life, team-building events, credential renewals, and endless reporting serve as social proof that the work matters. Employees invest time and money in certifications they know are irrelevant, maintaining them as a buffer against insecurity. Remote work has intensified these attachments, with workers going to great lengths to demonstrate presence and activity, even requesting more monitoring when surveillance is relaxed. What emerges is a system sustained by mutual pretense. Managers uphold the illusion that oversight is essential, employees act as if every task is critical, and organizations continue to reward the appearance of productivity. This creates a workplace where change is difficult, not because the work is valuable, but because the routines have become a source of psychological safety. The real irony is that even as technology advances and automation becomes more capable, the attachment to these rituals only deepens. The next evolution of the workplace will force us to confront just how much of what we do is about maintaining the illusion of value rather than delivering it. The AI irony. As organizations race to adopt artificial intelligence, a striking irony emerges. The technology is often directed at the wrong targets. AI can churn out generic mission statements and auto-generate email responses, but it rarely addresses the core inefficiencies that weigh down modern workplaces. Instead of using these tools to streamline bloated management structures or eliminate redundant roles, companies deploy them to automate surface-level tasks, leaving the deeper issues untouched. This misapplication is everywhere. Companies invest heavily in AI systems that monitor employee activity, tracking keystrokes and screen time with precision. These so-called bossware tools flag employees for taking breaks or pausing their mouse movements, yet they remain oblivious to entire departments that produce no measurable results. A Fortune 500 audit found that AI surveillance caught thousands of minor productivity incidents, but failed to identify a compliance team whose output was non-existent. The algorithms focus on what's easy to measure, not what matters. Administrative automation follows the same pattern. AI sorts resumes by keywords, generating neat candidate lists for HR, but does nothing to assess whether the roles themselves are necessary. Hiring algorithms automatically filter out applicants lacking trendy certifications, even when internal data shows no link between those credentials and job performance. The cycle perpetuates itself. Humans are hired to review the AI's decisions, creating more work rather than less. In the financial sector, the contradiction becomes even clearer. Banks deploy advanced machine learning to flag suspicious transactions, yet maintain layers of vice presidents and strategic initiatives, teams whose contributions are impossible to quantify. The technology excels at catching micro inefficiencies while overlooking the macro-level waste that persists at the top. Consulting and legal firms have adapted AI to fit their own rituals. Reports are drafted by natural language models, then handed off to teams of consultants or associates who humanize the output. The final product is more expensive and takes longer to produce, but the process justifies both the technology and the human roles built around it. Law firms use AI to review contracts, only to hire more staff to interpret and debate the AI's findings. The promise of efficiency is lost in the layers of oversight and validation that spring up in response. Healthcare and education offer their own examples. Hospitals implement AI diagnostics, then employ specialists to verify the technology's recommendations, often extending patient wait times without improving care. Universities use plagiarism detectors that flag student work, prompting the formation of academic review panels that spend more time policing the system than fostering original thought. In each case, AI is used to create new forms of busywork rather than to reduce it. The same logic governs government agencies and startups. The DMV automates license renewals with facial recognition, yet still requires multiple human reviewers to sign off on each application. Startups tout AI-driven hiring platforms while keeping large recruiting teams to override the technology's recommendations. Communications departments use AI to draft press releases, then pay staff to revise them for brand voice, resulting in minimal changes at considerable cost. Perhaps the clearest example is the rise of AI ethics teams. Tech companies employ entire departments to monitor algorithmic fairness, but these teams often have little authority to alter core systems. Their reports are filed away as a formality, while the algorithms continue unchanged. The function is symbolic, meant to reassure stakeholders rather than to drive substantive reform. These patterns reveal a consistent theme. AI is being used not to eliminate unnecessary work, but to sustain it. For every dollar spent on automating tasks, even more is spent on creating new roles to monitor, interpret, and justify the technology's output. The intended simplification gives way to new layers of bureaucracy, as organizations prioritize the management of AI over addressing the inefficiencies it was meant to solve. This is not a failure of technology, but a reflection of how organizations choose to apply it. AI is deployed to reinforce existing structures, not to question their necessity. The result is a workplace where the tools designed to increase efficiency end up preserving, and even multiplying, the very inefficiencies they were meant to replace. This cycle of adaptation and entrenchment isn't unique to AI. It echoes patterns that have surfaced throughout history, each time new technologies or systems promise to make work the historical pattern. Across centuries, organizations have shown a remarkable ability to preserve roles long after their original necessity has faded. The The persistence of obsolete jobs isn't a recent quirk. It's a recurring pattern rooted in bureaucracy, tradition, and human psychology. 18th century British warships, for example, kept powder monkeys on the roster for decades after advances in artillery made the role unnecessary. These boys once carried gunpowder to cannons, but as technology improved, the need for their labor vanished. Still, the position lingered, sustained by routine and the reluctance to question established practices. This pattern is visible in other historical settings. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's tea taster remained a fixture of court life long after the risk of poisoning had faded. The role shifted from essential security to a ceremonial duty, yet continued for generations. The job's survival wasn't about actual need. It was about maintaining appearances and upholding institutional habits. Victorian England's knocker-ups, people paid to wake factory workers, persisted well into the 20th century, long after alarm clocks became affordable. The service endured because it was familiar, not because it solved a problem that still existed. Bureaucratic inertia often turns oversight into its own self-sustaining system. The British Admiralty once employed keepers of the naval broom, officials tasked with organizing cleaning tools, a job that outlived its purpose by centuries. Similarly, early railroads didn't eliminate signalmen after automating signals. Instead, they rebranded them as signal supervisors, tasked with overseeing the new technology. Rather than reducing headcount, automation simply shifted roles, echoing today's tendency to create AI overseers who monitor software that rarely needs human intervention. The same cycle appears in civil service and industry. The U.S. Postal Service retained mail handlers to sort envelopes years after machines took over the task. These workers filled out daily logs documenting work that had already been done by automated systems. In British textile mills, overseers were hired to monitor child labor, and then overseer supervisors were added to monitor the overseers, until the compliance apparatus outnumbered the very children it was meant to protect. Each new layer of oversight justified the one before it, creating a bureaucracy that was difficult to dismantle. Legal and academic professions have their own versions of this pattern. 19th century English law firms kept junior barristers copying documents by hand long after printing presses made the task redundant. As their duties faded, these roles morphed into reviewing or managing paperwork generated by others. Universities maintained disputators to oversee debates that students had stopped attending, eventually turning these positions into committee roles focused on managing the paperwork left behind by the original activity. In medicine, asylums employed moral therapists to document patient progress, then record verifiers to confirm the paperwork was in order, even when neither had much bearing on patient care. The focus shifted from outcomes to process, with each new role justified by the paperwork generated by the last. Military and corporate organizations follow similar trajectories. The Prussian army kept parade ground sweepers long after their duties lost relevance, while early oil companies employed whale oil quality testers decades after switching to petroleum. When confronted with the redundancy, these roles were simply rebranded rather than eliminated. What ties these examples together is not just bureaucratic inertia, but also the influence of status and self-worth. Managers have long hoarded staff as a way to signal importance, a behavior seen in both feudal courts and modern corporations. The Puritan capitalist work ethic further entrenches these patterns, linking self-worth to the act of working, regardless of the work's value. People find comfort in routines, even when those routines no longer serve a real purpose. Attempts to eliminate obsolete roles rarely succeed outright. More often, the positions are renamed, their duties shifted, or their importance reframed. The cycle endures because it meets psychological needs and reinforces organizational hierarchies. Across economic systems, from imperial courts to modern offices, useless jobs persist, not as anomalies, but as features of how institutions adapt and survive. Yet, while this historical pattern is deeply ingrained, it's not unbreakable. Some organizations have managed to challenge these traditions and show that work can be restructured to focus on real value rather than inertia. Breaking the cycle. Instead of accepting bureaucracy as inevitable, some organizations have chosen to dismantle it and build something different. These companies have reimagined how work gets done, focusing on trust, autonomy, and the removal of unnecessary layers. Their approaches vary. But the results challenge the idea that hierarchy and busywork are prerequisites for success. Valve Corporation, a video game developer, is a well-known example. The company operates without formal managers or rigid project assignments. Employees choose which projects to join, form teams organically, and move between tasks as needed. There's no need for approval chains or status meetings. Work organizes itself around shared goals and interests. This flat structure hasn't hindered Valve's output. The studio has produced some of the most influential games in the industry. The absence of layers hasn't led to chaos, but to a culture where talented people collaborate directly and ideas move quickly from concept to execution. Morningstar, a tomato processing company, applies similar principles in a completely different sector. The company has no managers, job titles, or centralized decision-making. Every employee negotiates their responsibilities with their colleagues. Instead of performance reviews from above, compensation is determined through peer feedback. Each person writes a personal mission statement, outlining their contribution to the organization's objectives. Morningstar has grown into the world's largest tomato processor using this approach, showing that even large-scale manufacturing can function without traditional management structures. In the Netherlands, a national trial of the 4-day workweek produced striking results. Over 1,000 workers participated, and after the trial, the vast majority of companies chose to keep the shorter schedule. Productivity levels held steady or improved, and employees reported less stress, better work-life balance, and higher job satisfaction. The key was not asking people to cram more into fewer days, but rather eliminating waste, unnecessary meetings, redundant processes, and tasks that added little value. This experiment suggests that reducing hours does not have to mean reducing output, especially when organizations are willing to rethink how work is structured. Other companies have taken aim at meeting culture. Shopify, for instance, eliminated all recurring meetings with fewer than 50 participants. They also introduced No Meeting Wednesdays, giving staff a full day each week for uninterrupted work. Employees reported fewer distractions and more time to focus on meaningful tasks. The company didn't need new software or a radical overhaul, just the willingness to question whether every meeting was truly essential. Some organizations are changing how they measure productivity. Rather than tracking hours or counting completed tasks, they focus on outcomes. A German software company stopped requiring time logs and status updates. Developers worked at their own pace, moving from project to project until completion. The result was a significant reduction in project timelines, with less time spent on reporting and more on actual problem solving. Universities are experimenting as well. A handful have dropped publication quotas for faculty, instead evaluating research based on its impact and relevance. Professors now produce fewer papers, but the work is more substantial and meaningful. Early results show a decline in burnout and a renewed focus on genuine scholarship, rather than meeting arbitrary targets. Even in sectors known for regulation and hierarchy, alternatives are emerging. An Australian bank removed all middle management from one division, replacing them with self-directed teams. These groups set their own priorities and divided work based on strengths. After a year, customer satisfaction and employee engagement both improved, and the model is being expanded to other parts of the business. These examples point to a simple conclusion. The way work is organized is not fixed. Structures that seem permanent can be redesigned, and habits that feel necessary can be left behind. The hardest part is not finding alternatives, but overcoming the inertia and fear that keep organizations locked into old patterns. Most resistance comes from a desire for stability or a reluctance to let go of familiar routines. What separates these organizations is not technology or industry, but a willingness to focus on outcomes, trust employees, and eliminate what doesn't contribute to real value. They show that meaningful work and efficiency are possible when organizations let go of the need to control every detail. The challenge for most people is not just to recognize these options, but to decide how to apply them in their own careers. Your exit strategy. If you're hoping to escape the cycle of pointless meetings and performative busywork, your best route is to focus on work that can't be faked or outsourced away. The clearest exit strategy is to build skills that produce obvious, tangible results, skills that resist both automation and bureaucratic dilution. In these roles, your value is tied directly to what you create, fix, or deliver, not to how many status updates you send, or how well you play along with office politics. Trades are the most direct example. Plumbing, electrical work, and carpentry all require certified expertise, and the output is visible. A pipe carries water, a circuit delivers power, a cabinet fits or it doesn't. There's no room for abstract metrics or endless justification. You can't talk your way into being a competent welder. The same goes for specialized coding roles. If your code doesn't run, it doesn't matter how many buzzwords you use. These fields are insulated from the productivity theater that dominates so much of the modern workplace. The accountability is built in. Freelance work offers another path out. Platforms like Upwork and TopTal let you sell finished projects, apps, designs, articles, rather than hours spent in meetings or on calls. You're paid for what you deliver, not how well you perform the rituals of corporate life. This model rewards efficiency and skill, and it strips away much of the justification and reporting that fill traditional jobs. If you can produce work that clients want, you don't need to prove your value by filling out endless trackers or attending daily check-ins. Certain industries naturally repel the creation of meaningless roles. Healthcare, for example, is weighed down by administrative overhead, but frontline clinicians, nurses, doctors, radiologists, still do work that can't be replaced by a spreadsheet. A nurse's impact is measured in patients cared for, not in the number of emails sent. Aircraft maintenance, electrical engineering, and other technical fields share this trait. The work is either done correctly or it's not. There's little room for ambiguity or performative effort. Technical specialists often find that their reputation is their resume. A cybersecurity expert's value is obvious when systems remain secure. A skilled machinist's work is evident in every finished part. These roles don't require self-promotion or constant documentation to justify their existence. The results speak for themselves, and that clarity protects them from the layers of bureaucracy that proliferate elsewhere. Some professions, like software development, sit on the boundary. While big tech firms have created plenty of unnecessary roles, experienced developers, especially those with expertise in legacy systems or niche languages, are difficult to replace. Their output is essential and measurable. Unlike innovation evangelists or culture architects, their contribution shows up in systems that work. Trade unions play a role in keeping jobs meaningful. By enforcing clear job descriptions and compensation tied to skill, unions prevent the kind of role inflation that plagues corporate offices. You won't find a junior assistant pipe consultant on a union job site. Either you're qualified to do the work or you're not. Freelance marketplaces and direct-to-client work cut out much of the administrative noise. Writers, designers, and photographers can sell their work without having to become content strategists or visual asset managers. Upwork's data shows that freelancers often work fewer hours than their corporate counterparts, but with comparable or better earnings, and without the pointless rituals of office life. The key is to develop expertise that can't be easily faked or replaced. A carpenter can't bluff their way through a poorly built staircase. A journalist can't pretend to have written a compelling story. These roles resist the drift toward abstraction and ambiguity that enables BS jobs to thrive. Even as automation and AI advance, some types of work remain stubbornly resistant. An HVAC technician diagnosing a malfunction, a surgeon performing a procedure, a firefighter responding to an emergency. These jobs demand judgment, adaptability, and physical presence. They're not immune to bureaucracy, but their core value can't be captured in a dashboard or replaced by an algorithm. At the end of the day, the most reliable exit from the world of meaningless work is to focus on roles where output is real, where failure is obvious, and where success can't be faked. When the outcome of your labor is visible and necessary, the need for productivity theater fades. The path isn't glamorous, but it offers something that's become rare, a direct connection between effort and value. And once you see how much of modern work is about staying busy rather than getting things done, it becomes easier to step away from the game. For many, the reality is that work offers little sense of purpose beyond staying visible and occupied. Waylo's 2023 study found that 19% of U.S. workers believe their jobs are socially useless, a sign of how far the gap has grown between daily tasks and meaningful contribution. The prevalence of productivity theater and performative busyness reflects a system that rewards appearances rather than results. The solution isn't to work harder or accept the status quo. It's to recognize the patterns, question what adds value, and look for ways to focus on real outcomes, whether inside or outside traditional organizations. Comment below if you've seen bureaucracy in action, and subscribe for practical,